At the family dinner, my father's voice boomed saying, "You need to get a high-paying job or leave this family." His words hung in the air like a dark cloud, casting a shadow over the meal. My mother nodded in agreement, her expression stern. They had always placed immense pressure on me to succeed, but this felt like a breaking point. Across the table, my little sister, who had barely finished high school, was suddenly crowned the CEO of our family business. I watched in disbelief as they handed her the title, their expectations shifting from me to her in an instant. It was as if they had written me off completely, and in that moment, I felt a mix of anger and determination rising within me. I was the firstborn. The experiment. The daughter who read too much and asked why too often. I grew up in rooms that prized appearance over inquiry, tradition over truth. My father ran the family business like a kingdom, my mother ruled the social spaces with practiced ease, and my little sister, well, she was the crown jewel. Gentle, elegant, eager to please. I loved her more than I resented her, but I also knew I wasn't what they wanted when they imagined raising daughters. I was too curious, too opinionated, too unwilling to call a cage a nest just because it was pretty. Still, I tried. I wore the dresses, curled my hair, took the internships they suggested. I smiled in photos I didn't feel part of. But when I started my company, a clumsy, stubborn, unglamorous little startup that lived on caffeine and faith, they looked at me like I'd chosen exile. Like I was trading family for fantasy. I wasn't failing. I just wasn't following. You'd think the break would come like thunder, like shouting, like someone slamming a hand on the table. But it didn't. It came with lamb. With salad forks. With a toast to family direction. It came at a dinner I was expected to show up to, but not really belong in. And before the fork dropped, before the room shifted, before the cold click of my father's voice said, "Get a real job or leave the family," I already knew. This is the story of how I left quietly and built something louder than they ever imagined. Of how success came not as a scream, but as a whisper that said, "I remember." I still remember the weight of the roast lamb on my plate, the steam rising in soft curls like it had somewhere better to be, the clink of cutlery, my sister's perfume mixing with the scent of rosemary and oil, and how no one spoke unless it was about her. She'd just finished her internship, something shallow in marketing that my mother kept calling impressive, even though she couldn't explain what it was. I sat at the far end of the table like I always did, across from the china cabinet filled with things we never used, holding my tongue like a fault line. My father took his time with the wine, swirling it, sipping it, setting it down with a soft tap that somehow felt like a warning. I knew something was coming, the way you know when summer ends not because of the calendar, but because of the way the light tilts differently in the room. He cleared his throat once, twice, and then said, almost casually, that I should think about getting a real job, something respectable, high-paying, something that made sense to the family. Across from me, my sister didn't flinch. She looked down at her phone, scrolling like this wasn't about me. I asked what he meant, not because I didn't know, but because I wanted him to say it out loud. I wanted them both to name it, to stop hiding behind polite disappointment and finally call what they felt, embarrassment. My mother didn't wait. She said I was too smart to be chasing at things like a hobby, said it was time I grew up, said they'd held their tongues long enough. I remember the word stability coming up more than once, like I hadn't spent the last year skipping meals just to keep my coat alive. My father told me the business, his business, the one our grandfather had started, wasn't going to wait around for me to figure things out. He said he needed someone dependable to carry the family name forward, someone who understood legacy. I asked if he meant my sister. He didn't answer, but my mother did. She listens, she said. She doesn't try to change everything. There was a scrape of a chair, a shift in the air, and, just like that, it was done. They weren't asking. They were telling me either join their world or leave it. It wasn't a threat, not in the way threats usually come, loud and fast and angry. It was softer, sharper, more rehearsed, like they'd practiced this before I arrived. My mother passed me the salad bowl with her manicured fingers, like she hadn't just rewritten my place in the family. I didn't touch it. My appetite had vanished somewhere between real job and listen better. I looked at my sister again, waiting for her to say something, anything, but she just shrugged, like this was inevitable, like I'd made this hard on myself by not fitting the mold. My fork was still in my hand when my father said, "We can't carry your dreams forever, sweetheart." That part stuck. Because they never had. They hadn't paid a cent toward my idea, hadn't asked about the nights I stayed up fixing bugs until sunrise, hadn't noticed the way I was slowly pulling myself out of debt one freelance client at a time. But to them, I was still playing. I was still the reckless one, still too proud to wear heels, still too loud in meetings. They didn't see what I was building. They only saw what I wasn't inheriting. After that, no one said much. The meal went on like it hadn't cracked open something I wouldn't be able to close again. I chewed because I didn't want to cry, and I nodded because I didn't want to yell. Somewhere in the silence, my father brought up quarterly earnings. My mother asked if anyone had seen the new floral shop open on Madison, and my sister mentioned her upcoming training trip. I didn't speak again for the rest of the meal, just sat there with the weight of my own choices slowly settling into my chest like wet cement. When it was over, I cleared my plate like always, rinsed it in the sink, and stacked it gently on top of theirs. No one looked at me when I said, "Thanks for dinner," and no one responded. My sister took the last sip of her wine, eyes fixed on her reflection in the window. I grabbed my coat from the back of the chair, the one I used to sit in as a child when I didn't feel big enough for the table. And then I left. Quietly, respectfully, just like they always said I never could. They announced it at a family brunch 2 weeks later, like it was some kind of homecoming. My father raised his glass and said he was proud to pass the reins to someone who truly understood the business, someone reliable, someone cut from our cloth. My sister blushed, the way she always did when praise fell too easily on her shoulders. She hadn't asked for it, she just accepted it. I sat across from her at the far end of the table, the same spot I always got, the one near the kitchen door, where I could hear the plates being scrubbed. My mother beamed, proud in the way she gets when something is both public and polished. She'd coached my sister on what to wear, what to say, how to smile without seeming too eager. "It's a formality," she said once, brushing crumbs off her linen napkin. "You know how these things go." But I didn't. I didn't know what it was like to be chosen by default, to be crowned without effort. They framed it as natural. "She's always been around," my father explained. "She understands the flow." I almost laughed. My sister had spent most of her life avoiding that office. But they needed her, or at least the version of her they could mold. She wouldn't question the way things were run. She wouldn't change the dress code, or ask why the boardroom still had photos of all the men who'd led before. She wouldn't bring ideas that felt foreign to them. She was their continuity, their safety. And me? I was the detour. The failed experiment. The daughter who read too much, asked too much, and left too often. The one who didn't want to carry a legacy she didn't help build. The one who always asked, "Why not different?" I should have felt bitter, but I didn't. I felt tired. The kind of tired that sits behind your ribs, not from work, but from being misunderstood for so long it starts to calcify. I watched my sister accept the frame certificate, the company pin, the half-hearted applause from cousins who didn't understand what any of it meant. And I remembered being 12, walking through that same office with my father on a Sunday, tracing my fingers along the edges of the glass door he said would one day have my name on it. He must have forgotten he ever said that. I wondered if my sister remembered. If she ever thought about the way they used to talk about me before I became too much. Before my voice got in the way. Before my success became inconvenient. She had a way of smiling that made you think she knew more than she let on, but in that moment, she looked small behind the CEO sign, like she'd borrowed something that didn't quite fit. Maybe she knew it. Maybe she didn't. Either way, she played her role, and the room applauded. And I sat there, sipping my water, feeling like a guest at my own funeral. After the toast, my aunt leaned over and said, "You're next, right? You're always doing something big." I nodded, because it was easier than explaining. People didn't know how to hold your ambition when it didn't come with a title or a building. They didn't know how to clap for something they couldn't see yet. So I smiled and told her something vague. "I've got something in the works," I said. And it wasn't a lie. But it wasn't for them. It wasn't for applause. It was something I was building out of nothing, something messy, something real. The truth was, I didn't want the company. I wanted the chance to choose it or not. What hurt wasn't being passed over, it was being discarded like a decision already made for me. Like I'd made myself too inconvenient to include. My sister gave a speech at the end, thanking everyone, promising to honor the past and embrace the future. She looked directly at me once, just briefly. I held her gaze and didn't blink. I wanted her to know that I saw her. That I wasn't angry. Just awake. We stood outside after, in that awkward space where coats are zipped and goodbyes are made. My father hugged me, tight and distracted, his eyes already scanning for the valet. You could always come back, he said, like I hadn't been right there, like I hadn't watched them choose without hesitation. I wanted to say something sharp, something final. But I didn't. I just said, good luck with everything. And then I walked away, letting the sound of the street swallow whatever goodbye they thought I owed them. The first month alone was the worst, not because I doubted myself, but because the silence from them was louder than I expected. No check-in calls, no forwarded articles about tech trends, not even my mother's usual passive-aggressive texts about how some paths take longer than others. It was as if once I left that dinner, I'd also stepped out of their narrative completely. I'd become a ghost they could reference when they needed to feel grateful for my sister, but not someone they actually missed. I stayed up most nights, coding until my fingers ached, half hoping they'd call. My apartment was small, the kind of place you only love because you chose it with no one's help. I ate rice 5 different ways, learned to stretch leftovers into miracles, and took meetings from a desk made out of 2 crates and a hollow door. Investors weren't interested at first. I pitched to people who didn't look me in the eye, who kept calling my idea cute or early stage, like it was a houseplant that might die if I wasn't careful. Still, I kept going, one tiny win at a time, user by user, night by night, line by line. There was one night the heater broke, and I typed in gloves just to meet a deadline for a demo no one showed up to. I cried after that, not because of the cold or the failure, but because it reminded me of the night I got the flu and still showed up to my father's quarterly dinner, just to hear him say I lacked discipline. Those memories hit differently in silence. They feel louder somehow, when you have no one to tell them to. I didn't want revenge. I wanted distance. I wanted the room to succeed without needing to announce it. The shift came slowly. One feature went viral. Then another. Word of mouth picked up. Someone tagged us in a tweet that got retweeted by someone with a blue checkmark, and suddenly my inbox was full of questions, partnerships, praise. One morning, I woke up to find we'd been listed on a top 50 startups to watch blog. 2 weeks later, we were on Forbes. Not the cover. Not yet. But a full profile with my face, my name, my words. I read it 3 times, not out of pride, but disbelief. They'd seen me. And this time, I hadn't needed an invitation. The article didn't mention my family, but I knew they'd seen it. My aunt accidentally liked the post on LinkedIn before unliking it 2 minutes later. My sister's friend followed me on Instagram. My father's assistant viewed my profile, probably assigned to look into it. They didn't say anything directly, not at first. But I could feel the air shift. Like they were recalibrating. Like I'd become inconvenient again, but for a different reason this time. Success looks different when it isn't tethered to their approval. It doesn't feel like a gift. It feels like something you earned in spite of them. I bought a new coat that week. Not because I needed one, but because I remembered how my mother once said I'd never get taken seriously in those oversized things. It was black, long, tailored, with deep pockets and sharp shoulders. I wore it like armor. Not to protect myself, but to remind myself that I no longer lived in a house where love was conditional on performance. I didn't call them. I didn't send the article. I let the silence stretch out, let it do the work they once left to me. They'd made their choice at the dinner table. So had I. My team and I moved into a real office a few months later, one with glass walls and real furniture. I picked the art myself, nothing corporate, just pieces that made the space feel like possibility. I kept a sticky note on my desk that said, "Let them find out without you." I didn't want to be cruel. I just didn't want to explain anymore. Not to people who had already decided who I was. Not to people who thought CEO was something you inherited, not something you bled for. I'd bled for this. I still had the bruises to prove it. When the press called me self-made, I didn't correct them. Not because it was completely true, but because it was true enough. The people who helped me were not the ones who said they'd love me no matter what. They were strangers who became teammates, teammates who became family. And maybe that's what hurt the most, not that my family didn't help me, but that they didn't even ask if they should. They just handed the keys to someone who never wanted the car and told me to find my own road. So I did. And now they'd have to catch up. The first call came on a Wednesday afternoon, 2 months after the article, the kind of gray day where everything feels too quiet. I didn't recognize the number at first, and I almost didn't pick up, but something in me was curious, maybe even hopeful. It was my aunt. She said she'd seen me in a magazine at the salon and almost didn't believe it, said I looked so powerful, said my mother must be proud. I didn't say much. I let her talk. I wanted to hear how far they'd have to stretch to sound supportive without sounding guilty. After that, the others followed. A trickle at first, cousins I hadn't heard from since the holidays, old family friends suddenly interested in entrepreneurship, invitations to speak at alumni dinners I never attended. My mother sent a text asking if I could help her update her LinkedIn bio. My father's assistant emailed with a vague message about catching up when you're free. And then my sister called, her voice just slightly too rehearsed, saying how great I looked in that photo with the blue background, as if it hadn't been on the homepage of the publication for a week straight. They didn't say sorry. That was the thing. Not once. They danced around it with flattery, with nostalgia, with half-laughs about how you were always so stubborn, but never acknowledgement. Not of the dinner, not of the silence that followed, not of the names they called me when they thought I couldn't hear. They wanted access again, but not responsibility. They wanted to pick up the thread as if it hadn't been cut clean through. I didn't respond to most of it. I read the texts and let them sit. I let the missed calls pile up like unopened letters. Eventually, my sister tried again, this time with urgency. She said things were shifting at the company, that she could use another brain around the table. I knew what she meant. Their numbers were plateauing. Their brand felt dated. The strategy she'd copied from my father wasn't working anymore. She said she missed me, said she wished I'd been there for the transitions. I asked her if she remembered the dinner. She paused, laughed nervously, said, "You're still holding on to that?" And I realized, then and there, that none of them had. They'd moved on without a second thought. I didn't respond right away. I let her words sit in my inbox for 3 days before I answered. All I wrote was, "Forgot that dinner?" I didn't. No period, no warmth, just the truth. It was the first time I'd given myself permission to say it without needing her to agree. I didn't need an apology. I didn't even need acknowledgement. I just needed to say it out loud, to remind myself that my memory wasn't something I had to fold away just to make room for theirs. After that, the tone of the calls changed. My mother's messages became more sentimental, my father's emails more cautious. They wanted to meet, to talk things through, to explain what they meant that night. But I didn't want explanations. I knew what they meant. They meant I didn't fit. They meant I was too loud, too ambitious, too unwilling to become a replica of their comfort. I wasn't angry anymore, but I wasn't going to pretend I didn't hear them the first time. When someone shows you the shape of their love, you don't keep trying to fit into it if it cuts you. I wasn't punishing them. That's not what this was. I just didn't want to negotiate my worth anymore. I didn't want to sit through another meal where my silence bought me proximity. I didn't want to be told how proud they were now that they could prove it to other people. I wanted peace, and peace meant space. So I let the calls keep coming, let them echo into voicemail, let them feel what absence sounds like when it's chosen, not imposed. My assistant started filtering them eventually. She asked if I wanted to change my number. I said no. I wanted them to keep calling. Not to hurt them, but because I needed them to understand something they never had before, that just because I wasn't answering didn't mean I wasn't listening. I heard every word. I just wasn't stepping back into a room that had once asked me to leave so calmly it felt like love. Let them sit with that. Let them decide what it feels like to wait for a call that never comes back. When I walked into the NASDAQ building for the first time, it was raining. Not dramatically, Not enough to ruin anything, just the kind of steady drizzle that makes everything glisten. I wore the same dress from the dinner, the navy one my mother once said was a bit too severe. It fit differently now, less like a compromise, more like a choice. The sleeves sat better on my shoulders. I didn't need to adjust anything. I didn't wear it for them, but I thought about them when I zipped it up. Quietly. Like a prayer I didn't believe in anymore. The building smelled like money and glass cleaner. Everything was bright, reflective, designed for applause. People smiled at me like they already knew me. There were cameras, hairstylists, a tray of green juices no one touched. My co-founder cracked a joke about how far we'd come from coding in a moldy sublet with flickering lights. I laughed because it was true. But under the laughter was a different kind of stillness, the kind that comes when you realize no one can take this from you. Not anymore. You built it. You protected it. And now you're here, not by accident, but intention. Someone handed me a mic. There was a countdown, a spotlight, and then applause. I said something about grit. About grace. About doing the work no one sees. I didn't say anything about my family. Not because I was erasing them, but because I didn't want to give them the narrative. I was done folding myself into someone else's story just to make it easier for them to tell. This part wasn't about proving them wrong. It was about standing fully inside a life I built without needing them to call it success. Later that night, back at the hotel, I ordered dinner alone. Room service, nothing fancy, just the kind of meal you eat without needing to explain why you're eating alone. I sat by the window in my robe, watching the city blink and flicker, the way cities do when they're too big to care who's watching. My phone buzzed twice. Missed calls. One from my father, one from my sister. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. I could imagine their voices, soft with regret, but still trained in spin. I left them unopened, like letters from another life. That night, I thought about the word vindication, how it always sounds loud in the movies. A big speech. A dramatic confrontation. A spotlight and a slap. But real vindication is quiet. It doesn't knock. It arrives like calm. Like waking up and realizing you don't have to prove your worth in someone else's language anymore. It's wearing the same dress they dismissed and knowing it never needed their approval to look right. It's checking into a hotel under your own name and not flinching when they call you ma'am with respect. I flew home the next day and didn't tell anyone. No social media posts. No headlines. Just me, a window seat, and the click of my phone set to silent. I spent the flight revising a grant application for a mentorship program I was building. One that didn't require prestige or legacy, just effort and heart. The kind of program I would have wanted when I was still being told that dreams weren't real until someone else believed in them. I didn't cry. I didn't smile too hard. I just worked. That's how it is when the work becomes the reward. The truth is, I don't think they'll ever understand what they gave up. Not really. They'll keep telling the story the way it suits them, how they always knew I'd make it, how they raised a fighter, how families just have rough patches. That's fine. I don't need the credit anymore. I'm not trying to fix the record. I'm just trying to live in peace with what I know. And what I know is this. The loudest justice is staying whole. The quietest revenge is not needing any at all. They called more often after that, enough to remind me that they still wanted to be let back in. My mother left voicemails that felt more like performance than apology, talk of family ties, how no one gets it right the first time, how time heals everything. My father sent articles about women in business, highlighting passages as if to say he was learning, as if that counted for something now. My sister texted once late at night, "Things are harder than I thought." I stared at that message for an hour and didn't write back. The company kept growing. Not wildly, not loudly, but deeply. We hired slowly, intentionally. I built a culture where people felt like they could speak without earning the right first. On Fridays, we ate lunch together and didn't talk about metrics. Some days I stayed after hours just to water the plants. Success doesn't always look like noise. Sometimes it looks like being able to breathe in the middle of your own life without flinching. I'd stopped needing them to witness it. But they kept watching, and that was something I hadn't planned for. The tipping point came in spring, when the industry named me to its annual Influential Under 35 list. It was a big deal, the kind of thing they cared about. My inbox filled with congratulations, and among them were 3 separate emails from my father, all forwarding the same article, all with subject lines like, proud and look at you. Still, no mention of the dinner. No mention of the way they'd drawn the line in the sand and asked me to choose between my integrity and their comfort. They thought time erased things. But time only clarifies. That week, my assistant told me my father had been calling the office line, not just my personal phone. He'd spoken to our intern once, asked if there was a good time to reach the CEO. I told her to stop forwarding them. I didn't need to be cruel. I just didn't want to keep being kind at my own expense. A few days later, a handwritten letter arrived at the office. My mother's handwriting. She said they missed me. That they were sorry if they'd made me feel unseen. Not that they had, but that I felt. A clever dodge. I read it once and tucked it into a drawer I don't open often. The place where I keep things that don't deserve the fire but can't live on the fridge. I didn't respond. What could I say that wouldn't bend me backwards again? Some apologies come too late, not because they lack sincerity, but because they arrive only after proof. It's easy to want someone back after the world tells you they're worth it. It's harder to sit beside them when they're still building it from scratch, still showing up in rooms that don't remember their name. A few weeks later, my sister called again. This time I answered. Her voice cracked, not dramatically, just enough to let me hear that something had shifted. She said the business wasn't doing well. Said she'd underestimated what it meant to lead, what it meant to carry something without question. I listened. I didn't comfort. I let the silence be the answer she had earned. Then she said it. I wish you'd been there. We needed you. And I wanted to ask, did you remember that dinner? But I didn't have to, because I already knew she hadn't forgotten. So I said it. Calm, even, without weight. Forgot that dinner? I didn't. I didn't say it to wound her. I said it like you name a street you don't drive down anymore. Just a fact. Just a moment that existed and divided everything after. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, okay. No begging. No excuses. Just that. And it was enough. I hung up without promise. Without performance. Sometimes the most dignified thing you can do is let someone feel the silence they handed you first. Now I live in a home with floor-to-ceiling windows and a garden that grows wild. No legacy in the walls. No portraits I have to measure myself against. Just air and light and the knowledge that I am enough, not because of what I've achieved, but because I stopped shrinking to stay loved. That dinner doesn't haunt me. It's just a mile marker. The place I turned the car around. The place I learned what love shouldn't sound like. They still call sometimes. And maybe one day I'll answer again. But if I do, it won't be from the version of me they once tried to correct. It'll be from here, unfolded, unbothered, unreturned. Whole.